Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the National Training Agency's second webinar of 2019, focused on TVET and the Decent Work Agenda. I am Ms. Kim Cowie, Marketing Assistant from the Business Development and Communications Department of the NTA, and I will be moderating this morning's proceedings. This presentation will focus on ILO strategic objectives and decent work, the goal of vocational education, global drivers of change, the changing nature of work, and the implications of skills development. Today's presenter holds a Doctor of Education degree in Occupational and Technical Education and a Master of Science degree in Trade and Industrial Education. He was also the recipient of the International Technology Education Association, USA, Distinguished Technology Educator Award 2006, and is a member of several professional associations, including the National Association of Industrial and Technical Teacher Educators and the American Society for Training and Development. Currently, he is the Senior Specialist, Skills and Employability for the ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean. Without further delay, let me hand you over to and welcome Dr. Hassan Bata Ndahi.
Thank you very much, moderator. And let me take this opportunity to thank the National Training Agency of Trinidad and Tobago, and also to commend them on their webinar series, and also to thank them for inviting me to participate on this particular occasion. As the moderator said, I would talk briefly on some historical perspective about the ILO. Oftentimes people will ask questions because they associate the ILO to the activities of either employers or workers, but not purely an area of education. I would talk briefly also about decent work, which is the main topic of this discussion, anchoring it to the implication for technical and vocational education or skills development in general. And briefly, I would also talk about the goal for vocational education, because the National Training Agency, this is one of the trust, one of the area they work most in terms of their mandate. I will also talk briefly about what do we see as some of the drivers of change today that impacts skills development. Would also speak briefly about the changing nature of work and also the implication to technical and vocational education. Now, this is quite a broad topic. I have about 10 slides, so I would take at least an average of about 3 minutes on each slide, and in some slide probably less, in some slide maybe slightly more, and particularly when we get to the heart of the issue, the implication for technical and vocational education, because this is where the mandate of the National Training Agency lies mostly. So briefly, I would say the International Labour Organization is founded in 1919, just right after the First World War. Today, the ILO is celebrating its 100 years of existence. And as I speak, in Geneva, there's about 44 presidents and prime ministers of different countries that are attending the conference this year because of the celebration of the 100-year anniversary. There will be discussions on the future of work report. So this is something that the ILO feels should celebrate after 100 years of existence. Now, it was founded on a social framework for peace and stability after the First World War, aims at achieving a social justice through a structure of a tripartite nature. And you often hear the word tripartite nature, which means government, the employers, and also the workers. Now, For me, coming from the background of vocational education, even before understanding the organization of ILO and joining the ILO, there is something that one of the principles and philosophy of technical education is that what we teach, which is the curriculum, belongs to the community. It belongs to that society. By that, it means what we teach, it does not belong to the school. It means we have to go back into the community and find out exactly what they want. Because when your students graduate, they're going back into the community to work and to serve the community. So it is ideal to find out what the community wants you to teach. And there's no better way of talking to the workers, because if you're not a worker in a community, you might be an employer, someone who creates jobs and employ people. If you are not, probably you work with government, whether you're a politician. So by virtue of that, either we are workers or we are those who create jobs. And when you take a totality of that, it means take every issue we have back into the society to discuss, whether they're educational issue or any other policy issue. And on that framework, the ILO has worked on that particular framework for now 100 years. So, based on the functions of the ILO, it has 4 strategic objectives. One is to promote and realize the fundamental principles and the rights at work. Sometimes and often we go into the workplace and people do not understand even their basic rights in the workplace. There are certain fundamental principles that every worker is supposed to understand and to know. Now, in vocational education, and I will speak a little bit later to the goal of vocational education. In the early days of vocational education, probably around 1600, the goal was to teach someone to go back into the community to work. It was about work. And so, why, if that was the goal, it's then important for that individual to understand that they have some basic rights when they get into the workplace. One of the strategic objectives also is to create greater opportunities for women and men to secure employment that is decent. And the basis to securing decent employment is education. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when we speak about ILO, sometimes people think it's only about the employer activities and the worker activities. But the basis for everyone to get into the employment place, the first thing is education. So it cannot be devoid of education because that's the first thing that one needs to acquire. Enhance the coverage and effectiveness of social protection for all. What it means is that while you are in the workplace, you're covered by either pension, so that when you are retired, there's something for you to fall back. There are many other issues within social protection. And then, of course, the other one is to strengthen the dialogue among all the tripartite partners. It means also to strengthen dialogue on every work-related issue among members of that society or community, whichever one that applies. So what is then decent work? Decent work is a productive work. If I am to go to work on a given day but didn't do anything, can we then assume that that is a productive work? Or if I were to go to work and I do the same thing every day without any change, can we assume that that also is a productive work? Or one would say the job where you go and you didn't do anything, all you just sit because there's nothing to do. Is it a productive work? A work that pays fair income. Am I receiving a fair income as to what services I provide? There's also social protection that I mentioned for workers and also their families. This is all the benefits, as I have mentioned. There's also personal development, a work where you grow, where you have access to personal development, a work where you are able to integrate with your own peers, you're able to participate in terms of decision making, not a place of work where your decisions are not valued or you have no right to add to any discussion within the workplace. That is why the productive work can also be affected. If you cannot speak, you cannot add to any discussion, how could you be productive in such settings? Human dignity, where you're respected, where you're valued, is also part of what decent work means. Freedom to express your concerns, to express yourself without any retribution, or, as some people say, burning your bridges, is also the concept of decent work. Freedom to organize. And this is very critical. In the early days, during the Industrial Revolution, when people have to move into work, there was a lot of abuse of the worker at that time. There people could work more than 40 hours. There were child labor at the time. And at that time, trade union had to organize to defend the right of the workers. And at that particular time too, the ILO was not existing. This was in the early 1700, 1800. So the trade union have contributed immensely to what we have today in the workplace. And without that organization, today a lot of things would have been different. And remember what I mentioned earlier. If there are issues within the workplace, it demands a discussion of and a contribution of all the workers. If there are issues within the workplace, as I said, we take it back to the society. It means an inclusive process, equality of opportunity in the workplace, and treatment for all. So these are some of the concept that decent work all entails. But has not been very easy for the last 100 years. If we looked at what was happening, even in the 17th, where workers' rights were not respected, where people could not speak freely, it's still happening today after 100 years. And ILO continue to work on those issues. Now, in a nutshell, this other diagram I'm showing here is to summarize decent work, meaningful and productive work. It pays a living wage, provides benefits and social protection, is protected by strong labor laws and guarantee workers' rights, including freedom of association, the right to join and be represented. So then, what the ILO does today with regards to the decent work, we have what we call the decent work agenda. And so the ILO goes into a country and the country decides to look at the 4 strategic objectives and issues within those 4 strategic objectives that they want ILO to provide technical services, technical advice so that they can develop within those particular areas. So in a nutshell, decent work means those elements that I mentioned. And if you're going into the workplace without understanding those elements, then your rights can be violated. The environment may not be conducive for you to work. You may not be heard, even when there are issues, and on and on and on. Living wages cannot be paid, and we can go on and on. So what is then the goal of vocational education? Since the early 1500s, towards during the apprenticeship era, where it was the only way where people were trained to go into the workplace. And I must say it's one of the best way one could educate someone to go into the workplace. But it was used then because there were not, vocational institutions were not existing. And during the Industrial Revolution, schools, vocational schools come into existence because of the need for workers at that time. And the goal of vocational education was to educate someone, to prepare them to earn a living by going into the workplace. I think this is very important in our preparation of our graduates, of our institution. Are you preparing them enough to go into the workplace and start working from the first day they're in the workplace? And this is the issue today, where employers are saying they're coming into our workplace, but they're not well prepared. Remember that the goal is to prepare them to go into the workplace. And vocational education has been criticized on the basis of that it is shallow in terms of its own knowledge that it provides. There were not further pathways for further education. But those are just myths. It's not true that really exists. It prepares the learner also for learning. And I will explain why, even in the early days, in the 1600s, one of its goals is to prepare you to continue to learn, to prepare you to go into the workplace. So by virtue of that, the vocational student is a learner and is a lifelong learner. A vocational teacher is a learner and is a lifelong learner. And we say in the philosophy of vocational education that the nature of the student is the same as the nature of the teacher, and the nature of the teacher is the same as the nature of the student. It means they will continue to learn throughout their life. They will continue to seek new information. But is it the case today when we educate people in vocational education? Further education was also part of the goal. Of course, in other countries, because of the difficulty of setting up vocational institutions, the pathways were not that many for someone who gets into vocational education. Vocational education also holds a very strong orientation to change. If one is a lifelong learner, it means you will continue to change. Within the philosophy of vocational education, we said our curriculum is true with a small t. It means that truth can change. And when the facts change, we have to also adapt to that new changes. And so it holds a strong orientation to the workplace. Part of our training, the student has to be in the workplace. It is a component and integral part of the training. Is it the case today? Not in all cases. It is not an option, but it's an integral part of the training of vocational education. It models its institution after the workplace, very critical, which means the equipment that I use in the workplace will be similar to the equipment that I use in schools. Because remember I said, when we educate a student, they are going back into the workplace to perform even on the first day. The equipment they use in school will be the same equipment they would use in the workplace. The school might not be a production equipment, but carries the same functions. It measures its outcomes by the employment of its graduates. Are the graduates of the vocational education employed? Or are they not employed? Are they able to create jobs themselves if they seek to create jobs, to establish their own businesses? These were fundamental goals of vocational education more than almost 200 years. So if someone is saying something different, it is not the case. They need to go back and read the philosophy of vocational education. So what do we see today as driving what we do in vocational education? There are demographic changes. We're seeing young people, high unemployment. We're seeing older people being required to come into the workplace because of their knowledge and experience. So even when they are retired in some countries, they're going back to employment. Educational attainment is driving also what we do today. The employers are seeking more education. For example, here in the Caribbean, we have the Caribbean vocational qualification. But for some time, we were issuing, and up till now, between level 1, 2, and maybe not so much of level 3. These are mostly low-level educational attainment. It means then we need to move to higher levels of our certifications, the vocational qualification. Equity and inclusive education. Vocational education is the only education since its inception included everyone. Dewey argued in the early days of his writing that it is an education for all, because at that time there were those who argued that it should be education for the poor. People who come from poor backgrounds should learn how to use their hands, but people who come from a rich background should only learn vocational education in order to know to feel what nature is. So that disparity and that argument, even in the early days, made vocational education to include all, including persons with disability. So you could imagine that even persons with disability could go into a vocational education where they use equipment, tools, but could not go into a regular institution where they do not have to use some equipment. Vocational education has since its beginning included everyone, its own design. But today we're seeing more of an inclusive education. Advocate for more inclusive education because of more an inclusive workplace. We're seeing technology, as it was the case then during the first industrial revolution, the second, the third, and now the fourth industrial revolution, or 4.0, as we mentioned. Technology will continue to drive, and even more so, and I'll show a slide that can illustrate that in just a moment. Climate change and the transition to green economy. This is an area that is much talked today, and as a result, what are we doing in vocational education? Remember, I say we adjust to changes. We seek new information. So what are we doing? Our curriculum is not fixed. Our curriculum is truth with a small t. It can always change. And we said the curriculum belongs to the community. So if this is an issue in the community, what are we doing in our vocational education program? Are we establishing new program, new courses to address this issue within our society? So let me, in the discussion of the demographic changes, I like to show this graphical representation of what that means. If you look at, this is a projection of US working age population by age group. By 2015, about 20% of the workers will be around the age of 65. By that 2015, people between the age of 20 to 35, there will be about people between the age of 20 to 35. But if you look gradually, the graph tends to converge by 2060. What it is saying, the age between 45 to 64, and the age 65 and above, and the age 25 and 44 will all converge in the workplace. And that is important for us to know in vocational education, that older people will be coming back to work. One reason, people are living longer. The other reason, because of their experience and knowledge, they are required back into the workplace. What would you do with the younger population? What will happen with the younger? They will be competing with the ages between 45 and 64 and 65 and above. They will be converging by the year 2060. So it's something that in vocational education we need to pay particular attention to in terms of the quality of training that we provide. So the change in nature today, and I don't want to go too deeply into that, but as it impacts us, and I just want to mention skills requirements is changing. This is not new. It has changed during the first industrial revolution, even before the first industrial revolution, when it was an agrarian society. It changes during the second industrial revolution. It changes in the third, and now we're in the fourth. It's changing. How did we adjust to all those changes? If our curriculum belongs to the community, it belongs to the society, we have to go back to the society and say, what skills do you require? You cannot establish a program in a community where the program is not needed. If a community do not need a nurses because they have a saturation of nurses, why run a nurses program? Or even if it is an aviation program and that community do not need it, why run that program? And if there is a need in a particular area, that is the area we address in technical and vocational. It means we're always at work. We're always at our feet. Remember I said we model the industry. Our school is modeled after the industry. What does the industry need? Where are they at any particular time? Just the way we have adjusted in the first, second, and third industrial revolution, so we are required to adjust in the fourth. It's nothing new. The only thing that is new is the technology and the skills that have been required at that particular time. So we see technology as a driving force. Here in the region, in 1990, when the TVET policy was developed, one of the reason was the focus in changing technology. What have we done since 1990 in order to catch up with what the technology? The good thing is that there's a level playing field in terms of education today. Once upon a time, you have to have the library. Today, the library is on our palm. We can check any information. We can develop our curriculum. We can teach our stuff. So every country, there's a level playing field in terms of education today. And every country can be great, can have their own niche in any one particular area of technology. Automation did not start now. It started during the first industrial revolution, when engines were driven by steam. They were driven by pneumatics, by air, and by fluid. It continued right into today. Some part of automation you still uses those technology. We hear today about more of artificial intelligence. It's just what is computer and computer coding. It takes maybe when you dial a phone, you get a voice that answers your phone and continue to guide you through some menu of selection, doing exactly what a human being would do if they were at the other end. It's still just computer and coding. When we forecast technology in the 1990 in our regional policy here in the region, what have we done towards that technology? Because we're supposed to be at this stage today where we can use that technology, where we can teach artificial intelligence, we can teach coding, we can teach programming, just as it's been taught in other schools in developed countries today, in their high schools or secondary schools, and even in primary schools today. Imagine new occupations. We talk about the green area today. It's not complicated. We can go into our building and see what we need to add into our building curriculum, into our construction curriculum, into our plumbing curriculum, water heating, in many different areas. That is just what it means. But if we don't revise our curriculum, we don't revise our program, then we will see these areas as something very complicated when they are not. As a vocational institution, we must address these issues. Short contracts we see today in terms of people move around and take small jobs for a few days, few weeks. There is no steady job. The downside of this, when the ILO, since 1919, continue to advocate for this fairness, fair income, social justice, when the activities of the trade union balances the need of what society, the worker, and also the need of the employer, in the early days, even before the ILO, was basically to avoid this area where people will work on short contracts. Even then, workers were needed at that time. In 1919, the first ILO conventions was on youth unemployment. Why did we have youth unemployment in 1919? At the time when, just after the war, people were rebuilding, it was because more education were needed at the time. So this has implication as to what we do in technical and vocational. If we were to train our workers to go into the workplace, if they were to understand what is decent work, what are some of the elements within decent work? Diversity in the workplace is also a changing requirement today. The world has become very diverse. People are moving today. The border has been almost removed. You can leave Trinidad today and be in China tomorrow and come back by Monday or Sunday. It's possible. It depends on what you're going to do. It was not possible some 100 years to take a trip of 2 days or 3 days. And so the world has become very diverse. People have moved around the world today. And in a diverse workplace, just as I talked about an inclusive education from the beginning of vocational education more than 250 years ago, it was an inclusive education system. Today, in many countries, we do not have an inclusive education system. We start segregating people that are disabled from those that are not disabled. So the segregation starts even there. And when we graduate, we are working in government, we do not understand the need to have an inclusive workplace. We do not understand because we went to school in a segregated form where the disabled went different place and those that consider themselves able went to different schools. Now, the changing nature of work, in my view, looking back as what has happened throughout history, is not so complicated and different. The requirements will be there and it will continue to change. So how do we address these issues, technical and vocational? In technical and vocational, we anchor everything that we do to the major 3 philosophical underpinnings in education. One is the essentialist philosophy. As a teacher or as a student, the essentialist approach combines both the idealist and the realist view that intellectual development of the mind is the most important thing. This is where the universities in the past have anchored everything they do to develop the mind, to give you a lot of information because the teacher or the professor understands the facts. And today we see the same thing happening. And I said to you, it was not the philosophy of vocational education alone. We combine that because we have to teach the individuals to understand, to develop their mind, but it's not the dominant philosophy because it says our goal is to send someone to the workplace. So while we use that in teaching to develop their mind, we also give them the freedom to choose. That is the philosophical underpinning of the existentialist. So in some activities, they will choose what they want to do and the freedom. I often hear people say, well, teaching today, you have to be a facilitator and not a teacher. Well, if you're only a facilitator, you have to limit the role of a teacher. Just because they don't want to hear the name called a teacher. A teacher combines all these three philosophical underpinnings. Someday they would, in some activities or in their teaching, they use the essentialist approach to develop the minds of the students, or they will give the students in some areas the freedom to choose and to express themselves on the facts that how they see the facts. But the pragmatist approach is the dominant philosophy in vocational education because we see reality, we see truth changing. So if something changes in the workplace today, that is what we need to do in our curriculum. When we say today there's a green technology, and in our construction, in our plumbing, in our automotive, then our curriculum in automotive, in construction, and you can name them, need to be revised, and those competencies embedded into that curriculum as what we teach. That is why the pragmatist is the dominant philosophy that we use, because we go into the workplace to provide our services exactly as is needed in the workplace. It does not limit a vocational student from anything. What it does, it takes you back to the workplace. Now, while it is true that it has been accused in the past that it is shallow, which, as I said, is just a myth, it depends on how the curriculum changes. They are lifelong learners, they know that, and we, the teachers, know that. And so, what are your curriculum? Are you updated? The reason why our students today are being told they do not have adequate information, knowledge, they cannot perform in the job place because our curriculum is not changing. It's the same thing for decades when skills requirements have changed. Transaction is the process. What changes we have to adapt? What is the new thing? What is the requirement in the workplace? And we have to adapt. Nothing is fixed. Truth is not a fixed thing for a vocational educator, whether the teacher or the students. If a student comes to me and says, this is the fact, I have to accept the fact if I check and I find that that is true. So let me go back and say, in the first industrial revolution, during what we call Industry 1.0, it was mechanization, as I said, steam engine, but later we move to mass production where we see automation begin to be used. Products are produced in mass. How did we change? Electrical energy was used to drive the engines, to drive the motors. We adjusted, fine. We produced workers who went back into the industry, whether they are the health industry, whatever industry it is. We adjusted. And then we move in the 1960s to more automation, because automation did not start today. It starts somewhere around 1940s. It did not gain ground because of the way it's been used. But as technology improves, automation also improves. We see more electronics and computer into the workplace, right up to the year 2000. With the internet today, it has changed how computer works. More programming, more coding. And this is where we are. And what it means for vocational educators that in your programs, in our schools, we have to start very early teaching all this programming and coding in order to meet the demand of the Industry 4.0. And so that's another explanation, another figure that explains. So between the year 2000, between now to year 2050, we would be within the 4.0. But what happens after that? It will change very fast. It's going to change very fast. And until we get into the area of computers, the area of coding, the area of programming that is driving just about everything, then our education system or our vocational training programs would be at disadvantage. So what is the implication? And this is where I think it's more important, and I have just about 5 to 6 minutes to go through that real quickly. Educated and skilled workers is what the employer needs. It is the goal of vocational education for more than 200 years. It has done it before and should be able to do it now and going forward. What it means is that you must design and deliver good quality education where you can articulate your programs to further education, because I said learning to learn is one of the goals. For seeking more knowledge as further education. These were goals that were there for all these years. It has not changed. The philosophy has not changed. So if anybody is to tell you something, let them anchor it to this fundamental philosophical underpinning. Qualified instructor. This is a principle and part of our philosophy. It will never change. You can have everything. If the instructors are not qualified, if they are not qualified, train as vocational educators who understand the community, who understand the workplace, who themselves go into the workplace to learn new information and come back into the classroom, who sends their children into their students into the workplace, then they are not qualified. Qualified instructors who understand the psychology of teaching, the principles of teaching, and the philosophy that underpins what they do. We must also today go into these digital skills. Because digital skills, since the introduction of computers, it continues to change more and more. Today it is coding, it is programming that drives everything, drives every old type of machines that are driven now, not by air mostly, not by gases, although still use fluid and other types of, maybe even steam in some cases, but they are driven more and more by computers. Today, computers, you can drive an industry thousands of miles today sitting in one place on a computer. So new occupations, skills anticipations and requirement. Looking at Industry 4.0, we know exactly this thing is there. What do we anticipate in our community? What do we anticipate in terms of businesses changing here in Trinidad and Tobago or in any part of the Caribbean? We had done, as a vocational institution, you do not wait until you get there before you do what is already existing. All what we said in industry is already existing. But because maybe we haven't gotten into this aspect of technology as we have designed in 1990 in our regional policy, and so we're still far behind. I also did mention that we are lifelong learners, and you have access to promote it. You have access to your PLR, prior learning assessment, access to the CVQ certification, so that individuals, whether they're in vocational or out of vocational institution in the workplace, can have opportunity to continue to seek more information and grow and obtain new skills. Sustainable resources. You cannot run a vocational institution if you do not know where your funds are coming and if they are not sustainable. It must be sustainable. Because of that, in vocational education, we use the community. Everybody in society has a stake in it and should contribute to the funding of vocational. It is very expensive if it should be done right, because remember I say we model it after the workplace. All the equipment that are used in the workplace is what you need to have in the classroom. Without sustainable funding, consistently you know what you have. And so everyone in society should be part of funding. Employers, workers, in some cases, government alone cannot. There's no country on earth where government alone funds adequately its technical and vocational. No country in the world. It's always employers, workers, and government. Sustainable entrepreneurship education. Remember I said either our graduates create employment. So right from the beginning of vocational education, we teach entrepreneurship education. Here in the region, in a document of your teacher training, technical and vocational education curriculum, has entrepreneurship education. Every teacher should have gone through that entrepreneurship education. By virtue of that, should be able to teach their students how to create employment, how to create jobs. But this is not what sometimes is difficult for us to do for some obvious reasons. But that is the ideal thing. Once we fall behind, we can easily explain why we are falling behind. Work-based learning. I said we have a relationship with the employer. Our students have to be in the workplace as an integral part of their education and training. It is not an option. It is core to what they do. Today we train them, they've never seen the workplace, and they go into the workplace and they cannot perform. It is integral. We have to find a way to match our curriculum in such a way that they all have that workplace experience, internship, student organization, and the like. Governance of the management is important. We train our managers of our institution because they have to understand the role of the community, the role of the employer, and the contribution of the worker in the workplace. And so if someone will manage, do they understand their role as managers of our institution? How do we govern? Do we have committees? Do we have advisory boards? Do we have council? Remember I said when there's a problem, we take it to the committee. We have to bring them back into our institution. And I think finally, I would say, although we have very limited time, I would be glad to take some questions, and I'll do my best to provide some information that you may want to have. I have a question here. Do I go with the first question?
Sure.
One of the first questions that was sent was, given the changing nature of work and the greater focus on automation, what can be done to better prepare workers for this transition and transformation? Just by the virtue of this webinar presentation, the preparation should be done in school, not after they are graduated from school. So once we have a vocational education, all these things are in place. We are part of the workplace. We are part of the society. We know what they need. And this is what we go and we infuse into our curriculum. Our curriculum is truth with a small t. It's a truth that changes. Once it changes, we have to change. If we go by those principles and by that philosophical underpinning, this will not be existing, because we have adjusted throughout the changes in industrial changes over time. The other question is, what can be done within the realm of TVET to create more gender-sensitive approach when addressing the skills gap? Skills gap can be, there is a gap between what a student has learned and what is required in the workplace. And the gap, and I did mention several times, that the workplace is an integral part of our education and training system. If they find themselves during their own training, then they already understood what the workplace is. The skills gap is true. That is why when we go on internship and we do apprenticeship as part of our program or on-the-job type of training, we close the gap from the knowledge we receive in school and the practical application in the workplace. We need to remember that the school gives us more of knowledge and little of the practical application. Skills is the application of knowledge. The capacity to use knowledge is what we refer as skills. If you do not have the capacity to use the knowledge you acquire, it means you're not skilled in your area of work. And to be skilled in the area of work, you have to be in the workplace. And that is why it is an integral part of that education and training. That's why we say vocational education and training. That training takes place in the workplace. Training cannot take place in the school. We provide knowledge, we provide the education, but the training is part of that integral part of the workplace. and to address gender-sensitive approach in vocational education from its beginning is an education for all, even it made provisions for persons with disability. But society has its way of accepting vocational education or not accepting, but that is part of some societal issue where we attach more importance to sitting in the office rather than being in a place where we get our hands dirty. But that is not all what vocational education means. It means it's in all occupations. It means work. No matter what you do, you end up in the workplace. And if you cannot end up in the workplace, you will create your own employment. If you can't create jobs, then you have a problem. And then the other question, given the unpredictable nature of the future of work, what universal and social protection mechanism can be implemented? That is why we need to understand what is the workplace. What is decent work? What are my rights? What do I need to know when I get into the workplace? And these are part of why when during your own training, we send the individuals to the workplace. They begin to learn what the workplace means. When I was doing my undergraduate degree, in the 5 years of my degree, I go to the industry every summer for 3 months for the 3 years I was pursuing my degree as an integral part of, so I understood the workplace even before graduating. I worked in the workplace 3 months and I come back to school. Those things have been abandoned in many countries today, and that is why we are struggling with our employers. Then I think there's another question. The World Development Report on Changing Nature of Work indicated that social behavioral skills are becoming more important, given the importance of this in order to function with globally competitive workspace. What can be done within Trinidad and Tobago to quickly and effectively equip the workers? I would still go back and say, equip your technical and vocational schools and all your schools, provide sustainable funding, good management, people who understand how to manage institutions. Put the right teachers, not just anyone who wants to teach. Everybody can teach, but they are not teachers. So you have to put someone who is trained to be a teacher. We don't send anybody in the hospital to become physicians. Why? Because they can take the life of many people. Well, when you send someone who is not a trained teacher, gradually or indirectly, they waste the life of young people they teach because they do not understand what teaching is all about. A good teacher understands the psychology, understands every student in class, their needs, their learning difficulties, understand the principle and the approach to teach because they have been taught how to look at all these clues and to do all these things. When you're not a teacher, you're only there babysitting our young children, and they will come out exactly as they have been babysitted. So let me take questions from, those are the 3 questions. Any other 4 questions?
Yes, I have a couple more here.
Yes, ma'am.
So someone asked, is being self-employed better in the future workspace?
As a vocational educator, whether I have said in the beginning, we educate our students in vocational to go to work. Whether you create your own employment, you are now in the workplace. You have created, that is your work. Whether you are employing people, that is your work. If you go to be employed by someone or company or whoever, that is your work. So from the beginning, we train and we educate to go into the workplace. Work is the central aspect of a human being's life. No one wakes up in the morning and just sit and look at the sun. Something is wrong with the individual. You must get into the work. You have to do something, whether it's a paid work or a non-paid work. But the central issue is earning a living. Through work, you cannot earn any living through something else. It has to be through some form of work.
Okay. What strategies have been used by other countries to regulate or advance the decent work agenda?
Well, I have mentioned some of the
Yes.
cardinal reflection of agenda. It's been difficult since 1919. The ILO is 100 years promoting all those concepts. But we find today in the workplace, workplace, people are frustrated and they cannot be productive if you're frustrated. In some workplaces today, people are not heard. In some workplaces today, you cannot speak. When you speak, there are retributions. You might burn your bridges in the workplace. And all those things affect the worker and affect the employer itself, because if the production is low, it's affecting the employer. That is why this tripartite nature of bringing society to discuss issues and come into an agreement as to what to go is the best thing you can have in society. Take, for example, even in your own homes or anywhere where decisions is one-sided, there's always conflict. And in vocational education, we believe that what we teach does not belong to us as school, but it belongs to the society. Society know what they need. Today we call it skills anticipation, we do a skills requirement. That is what the society needs. We don't establish program when we don't need it. We're wasting the life of the young people who go into that without good career counseling. And this is another aspect of vocational education. We counsel young students, we show them all the different occupations that are out there. We use their abilities to tell them, what about this, what about this, what about the other jobs that are out there, and people are not, all the programs are not even available in some cases. Okay, any more questions?
One final question. What do you believe is the major implication of Venezuelan migrants in terms of TNT's efforts with the decent work agenda?
I will still go back. The goal of vocational education is an education for all.
Yes.
Regardless of where I would find myself today, if I have access to education, the better for that society. If I do not have access to education, the more disadvantaged I am to that particular society. So these are concepts that have been there for over 200 years. And because we do not practice those things, and today we can see high youth unemployment across the world. We see what is happening today, conflicts around the world. We see what youths are getting into because the system is not working very well as it should be. It is not that anything has changed. And I always said that we would get to where we are, where society needs us, if we do exactly what our principles and our philosophy says in vocational education.
Okay. On that note, we would like to thank you, Dr. Ndahi, for your presentation and for sharing your morning with us. Also, congratulations to the ILO on the celebration of your 100-year anniversary, which is even more significant that you're here this morning as the NTA this year commemorates 20 years in TVET. So thank you for being here with us. We look forward to strengthening relations with you and the ILO moving forward. And also thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being a part of this morning's session. God bless.
Thank you.
Welcome.